If you've thought about upgrading from an MX-5 to a Porsche Boxster, I promise you you're not alone. In fact, that's exactly what I did almost a year ago. So in this video, I'm going to share why I upgraded from an MX-5 to a Porsche Boxster and whether it was actually an upgrade at all. The original ND MX5 was launched at the Chicago Auto Show in February 1989 and immediately grabbed the headlines, and soon after many awards for its simple, lightweight, purist design and its fantastic driving dynamics. Bereft of superfluous gadgets save for electric windows, it didn't even have power steering back then. It was a breath of fresh air, and it was kind of the starting gun for a Japanese sports car renaissance. I was working for Car Australia magazine at the time, so that meant I got to drive many of the 90s icons from the land of the rising sun, including cars like the original Honda NSX, the R32 GTR Skyline, the FD RX-7, that was a brilliant car, the Mark IV Toyota Supra, which I ended up, I bought one of those, brilliant machine, the Z32 300ZX, so many cars from that era. So when the original ND MX5 was launched back in '89, everybody who loved to drive fell in love with this simple, petite, but beautifully made little roadster. Some of them even snaring two at a time, one to store and one to drive. In 1995 or 6, I purchased a mint condition 93 ND MX5 from a lovely little old man who was insistent that the car go to a young man who would enjoy its many special qualities. And although I could barely afford that car at the time, that car saw me through 2 marriages and 1 divorce. Fast forward to 2018, and my urge to rewind the clock 20 years saw me take possession of a, again, mint condition, this time 2017 ND MX5 GT manual with 13,000 kilometers on the clock. A raft of modifications soon followed, including a Roadster Sport exhaust system, front and rear strut braces, garage line wheel spaces, which made a huge difference to how the car looked on the road, MCA coilover suspension, which totally transformed its handling. Even though it was a great handling car out of the box, it had quite a lot of body roll, so the coilovers made a massive difference there. And Zun Sport grill mesh, which kind of completed the look of the car. It was a fantastic looking machine. The car was driving nirvana, and like the NA, it delivered dozens of glorious memories. Only this time with my beautiful boy Tommy. Down the coast and through the high country, its abilities shone brightly and rewarded this driver with miles and miles of midlife smiles. Like the original, its steering was a thing of tactile beauty, and the gearbox was an absolute delight to row through the ratios. It was really literally just a wrist flick to go through the gears. Fantastic gearbox, definitely one of the best gearboxes ever made in my view. And it looked amazing too, with its lower, broader stance thanks to the suspension and the spacer mods, and it was typically Mazda bulletproof and relatively inexpensive to maintain. There was, in fact, no good reason to sell it, except that I'd always wanted a Porsche. In fact, I joked for years about needing a Porsche before I got too old to enjoy it properly. And every time my birthday rolled around, I would ask my mum if she'd finally done the right thing and bought me a 911. Sadly, she never did. And since I didn't feel like raiding our savings to buy one, I decided to rent one for a few days. That was in April 2022, and I have a video that I did about that experience, which you'll find a link to in the description below. The long and the short of it is, though, I didn't buy a 911. I just didn't see the value in it, at least not in Australia, where a base model is $315,000, if you can get your hands on one for that price. I mean, I could have raided our savings to buy one, but I just didn't see the value in doing that. So instead, I bought a pre-owned 2013 base model 981 Boxster PDK with Sport Chrono, sports exhaust, and Carrera Classic wheels. Essentially, it was the car that I'd had on my desktop wallpaper many years prior as the car that I would love to have owned. Even though deep down in my psyche somewhere, I had convinced myself that it was a 911 that I really wanted, because if I was serious about wanting a Porsche, then that was the Porsche to buy. Now, the differences between the MX-5 and the Boxster are, as you would expect, fairly significant. Everything on the Boxster feels more substantial than they do on the MX-5. The materials in the cabin are definitely of a higher grade, and everything opens and closes with a reassuring thunk. But the biggest differences, of course, are to be found elsewhere. And the cabin in the Boxster is significantly larger than the MX-5 in every dimension, making it less claustrophobic, especially with the roof up. And the roof itself blocks far more noise, far more effectively than the MX-5, making it a lot more comfortable on long journeys and conversations less of a shouting match. But the standouts, of course, are in the engine and the gearbox. The performance gains, 195 kilowatts in the base Boxster versus 118 in the MX-5, 0 to 100 k's an hour in 5.7 seconds versus 7 seconds. Those performance differences can definitely be felt and heard. There's something very special about Porsche's flat six engine and the variety of sounds that it makes based on revs and engine load. On the practical side, the Boxster offers two boots, a wide one in the rear and a very deep one in the front. The MX-5 makes do with what I would call a bootlet in the rear, a tiny shallow space to put your toothbrush and a comb. Internal storage is another huge Boxster standout, with a decent glove box, a small center console storage compartment, and two storage sections in each door. And let's not forget the clever cup holders. The MX-5 is absent most of these things. The bin between and to the rear of the seats require exorcist-like dexterity to access while driving, and the two storage compartments behind the seats require that you stop the car and get out of the car in order to access them. So, not exactly practical. Now, fuel economy is surprisingly similar. This really surprised me. There's less than half a litre per 100 kilometres between them in the country cycle, and less than a litre per 100 kilometres in the combined cycle. Okay, so that's all well and good, and not much of it is a surprise to any of you, I'm sure. Both cars are clearly brilliant, and obviously many people agree. I mean, the MX-5 is the top-selling real sports car of all time. The Boxster, though, is arguably the best convertible sports car ever made, exceeding, in my opinion, even the 911 Cabriolet. So here's the question. Is the Boxster good enough, particularly the one that I'm talking about, the 981 Boxster, is it good enough to justify the price jump from an MX-5 to the Porsche, especially considering that a 10-year-old Boxster can be around 150% the price of a brand new MX-5? Well, after 4 years behind the wheel of my ND MX5 and now getting close to a year with my 981 Boxster, I'd have to say yes. I mean, maybe not for you, but for me, absolutely. Now, cars are essentially an emotional purchase, and we justify them with cherry-picked facts or specs or statistics. Sports cars are an even more emotional purchase. A convertible sports car is a whole other level again. So the metrics that we use to determine where our allegiances go is even more difficult to quantify. So let me explain it this way. The MX-5 with quality coilover suspension is really about as good as steering gets. And on a challenging, tight mountain road like the Black Spur or the Eildon Jemison Road, I doubt that a Porsche Boxster could get away from it. I really do. I think an MX-5, well driven, would have no trouble staying with a Boxster. However, the Boxster feels more planted. It feels more reassuring and less twitchy than the MX-5 at higher velocities. So it instills greater confidence as speeds rise. As for looks, after 7 years on the road, the ND MX5, in my opinion, still looks fabulous, especially once it's lowered and the wheels are pushed out to meet the guards. Its profile remains a thing of beauty too, with the long bonnet and the short tail. Each time I see an MX5 go past on the road, I can't help but turn and look. They still look great. Likewise, the 981 Boxster still looks like the latest model, at least to the untrained eye. The front and the profile views are very similar to the current 718, and the interior is actually almost identical. But remember what I said about how it's difficult to quantify why we assign our allegiance to a particular car, especially when it's something as emotional as a convertible sports car. Well, here's how I describe the difference between the two in this aspect. Every time I opened the garage and saw my MX-5, what I saw was a long-time underdog that had punched well above its weight for the last 35 years. I almost wanted to walk over to it and pat it on the head and say, "Aren't you a good little boy?" In some ways, the Boxster used to be the same. Ever since it was released in late 1996, it has struggled to get out of the shadow of its older brother, the 911. That all changed in 2012 though, when it ceased to share body panels with its older brother. And it grew in almost every dimension as well, compared to its 987 predecessor. And it was lighter too. It had finally matured into a sports car that conceded nothing to the revered 911. And indeed, on challenging B roads, it even exceeded the performance of its rear engine counterpart. And so this is the lens through which I view my Porsche Boxster when I open the garage, swing open the door, and then fire up that beautiful, glorious flat six engine. It is, in a word, special, and to me, worth every dollar. So if you own an MX-5, you already own one of the world's best and most accomplished sports cars. But if a Porsche has occupied your daydreams and real estate on your computer screen's wallpaper, then I can tell you that the 981 is a very worthy upgrade from the MX-5. And if you can't quite make it to 981 territory, then a 987.2 is definitely a close second. And if money's no object, then a 718 GTS 4-litre, I reckon, is the sweet spot, and probably the car that I aspire to own next. Anyway, if you'd like to watch that video that I mentioned about my weekend with a 911 back in April 2022, just have a look up here. And if you'd like to see a video showcasing comments from 911 and Boxster owners, then just have a look here. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye-bye.